Okay, we are live. How are you, Alexander?
Somewhat rested after the weekend. I took some time to rest, which is about the first time I've done that for ages, but fresh and alert. And obviously, we're living through momentous times, and so much is going on. I mean, just to give one little example, Boris Johnson did his trip to the Gulf, and the media in Britain are saying it was fruitless. I mean,
Mhm.
that's what they're saying. And we've had Robert Hunbeck, the um, I find him slightly ludicrous green in economics minister. He went to Qatar. He's announced that he's done some kind of a deal with the Qataris, except of course the
Yes.
Qataris don't seem to know anything about it. And when you actually drill into the detail, it turns out there's no actual deal being done. I mean, I'm not even sure what exactly he thought. Whether he came a Qatari, he said, well, obviously, if you're setting up liquefied natural gas process plants in Germany, and we've got LNG, we're happy to sell it to you. And he came back and said, I've come to this extraordinary deal, long-term deal with the Qataris. But actually, he's not actually agreed anything. There's no figures, there's no price or volumes, and it's all been left to the companies to deal with. So we are in a very strange place at the moment. But
You
those
don't
are
need
just two
to,
things.
no, Alexander. You don't need to have contracts and prices and figures in
No,
today's,
no,
postmodernist world, in today's
not at
woke
all.
world. You just need to
No,
say it, and it's true.
absolutely, and it's true,
If you
exactly.
say it and
Yes.
you feel it, if you
Yeah.
feel that you're going to get liquefied natural gas and lots
Yeah.
of it to Germany
Yeah. Yeah.
in order to cover your losses from the Russian pipeline, well then it's going to
Yeah.
happen.
It's going to
That's
happen,
what
of course.
that's
That's
this is the world we
absolutely,
live in. You don't
absolutely.
need reality. You just need
No,
emotion. That's it.
you
Wish
need
it, and
emotion.
it happens.
Wish
Yeah.
it, and it happens. Exactly. Exactly true. Yes.
I mean,
Well,
but on a
there's
serious note, on a serious note, is the plan that you see them putting together, the EU, is it just a lot of ships leaving places like Qatar and just docking at LNG ports that's
yeah.
going to cover Nord Stream 2 and Nord Stream 1 and everything? I mean, is that the plan?
I think it is, to the extent that there is a plan. That is the plan. But of course, as I was reading, I mean, even to build the two LNG stations that the Germans are talking about will take them about 3 years. So I mean, it's not going to happen as fast.
That would be just for
And
Germany,
and that would just for
or
Germany, absolutely. I
okay.
mean, it's. I mean, we're talking about. I mean, I don't think there is any understanding of the scale of what they would have to do in order to achieve what they say they would achieve. I mean, ultimately, you can do it. You'd have to increase LNG production around the world by massive orders of magnitude. You'd need far more ships to carry it than exist today. You'd have to. I mean, this is a big operation that would take years to work out and do properly. I'm not saying it can't be done, but there will be enormous costs. LNG gas, by definition, is more expensive, much more expensive than pipeline gas. So you're going to spend an enormous amount of money to replace a cheap gas with an expensive one. But if that's what you want to do, you can do it. But don't come along and tell me that you've agreed a deal with Qatar when you manifestly haven't. I mean, that's just nonsense. And also talking about long-term agreements with Qatar. Qatar doesn't sell LNG on long-term contracts. That's not how LNG works. LNG is like oil. It goes to whoever is paying the highest price. That's what Qatar is going to do, and that's what it has been doing up to now. And I'm no doubt or reason to think that it will change, because that's what you can do with a ship. You can move it from one port to
Mhm.
another port. You can swivel it around, and that's what Qatar is going to do. It's not like pipeline gas, where that can work on the
It's
basis of
fixed.
long-term contracts. Exactly. So it shows, to my mind, that Handbeck either doesn't understand the gas market, which is very likely, by the way, or if he does, I mean, he's just spinning tails.
Yeah, and from what I understand, LNG can be anywhere upwards of 10 times more in price than through the pipeline.
Absolutely.
Is that correct?
Well, absolutely, that's exactly correct. And of course, it varies in price because, of course, you see, it's because it's traded on a very free market. I mean, it can go up, it can go down, it can do all kinds of things. What you're not going to get is the steady prices over long periods that are very, very important for big industrial
For business.
producers
Exactly.
to plan. I mean, so it's a fantasy, but of course, that's what he's going to do. As you said, it's all about, the heart over the head. There is a wonderful German film, Metropolis. I'm sure many people have heard it, the 1920s, in which they talk about, the need that, the heart must mediate between the head and the hands or whatever it is. It's the heart that really matters. I know it's very popular among some people. I think Madonna even did a song about it. As you rightly said, as you absolutely rightly said, that is the zeitgeist, to use the German word. The world of today is to do things in that kind of fashion. Don't actually sit down and plan and think it through. If you feel it, then it will come to pass.
Yeah. Well, we also have the news that, and we'll get into it, that the EU is now considering a full embargo on Russia, which is, I guess, going to happen. If you ask me, it's probably what the Russians have been expecting as well, because you'll notice, everyone should notice, I know that you notice it, that Russia continues to deliver the gas and the oil and everything to the European Union or to the United States. And a lot of the gas that is getting delivered to the EU is going through the Ukraine pipeline as well. That hasn't stopped.
No.
And the Russians will not stop that delivery of energy, because they are going to see those long-term contracts to completion.
Absolutely.
Now, once those long-term contracts end, whether they're going to be renewed, that's anyone's guess. I imagine that the Russians are going to send all that supply to the east. But they are fulfilling their contracts.
Absolutely.
And it seems that the Russians were, in a way, waiting for to turn the gas off, but they were waiting for the Europeans to turn the gas off on themselves. And exactly what an embargo is going to do. So the Russians are going to be, in the clear to say, well, we're delivering the gas and the oil. It's you guys that embargoed us.
Exactly. That's exactly what they're going to do. And can I just say, I mean, it's now, I think, becoming increasingly clear what all these big pipelines with China are all about. I mean, remember, there's a new, big, massive pipeline, which is going to be similar in scale to the ones that were going to Europe from Western Siberia, which is where the fields that used to supply Europe are located, and it's been built to China. Clearly, this has all been thought through in advance, and of course, they're going to be working on that. Now, it'll take a couple of years for that pipeline to be up and running, but up and running it will be, and the Chinese will get pipeline gas, which is cheap. And the Europeans will eventually, presumably at some point, end up with liquefied natural gas, which is extremely expensive and where the price oscillates wildly according to market conditions. But that's what we've decided to do, and that's where we're going to end up.
Yeah. For a big industrial business, that price of energy becomes a variable, fluctuating cost.
Yes.
Not good. Not good.
No.
And it increases at a minimum of tenfold.
Yeah.
Not good at all.
No.
Anyway, well, I just saw someone in the chat says they're waiting for the Europeans to stop punching themselves in the face. That's exactly right.
Well,
Russia doesn't have to retaliate at this level. No. Russia doesn't need to retaliate against the sanctions, because the Europeans are doing it all to themselves.
Absolutely. Somebody described it as circular firing squad.
Yeah.
I mean, that's what it is, basically. I mean,
jeez. All right. So we have a lot to talk about, everybody. We're going to be going for about, say, an hour and a half, an hour and 20 minutes now, because, Alexander, you're going to be on another show after this one, and we will post that show as well to, we'll get it on our locals community for sure, the Duran.locals.com. So you have another stream to do, another interview to do, but we're going to go for about an hour and a half. Whatever questions, if we don't have time for questions, super chats, we will cover them all in a dedicated video. All the questions from locals, from Odyssey, Rumble, and YouTube. We will cover all those questions in a dedicated show that we will put up tomorrow if we don't get to answering all the questions. So because we do have a lot to cover. And specifically, let's talk about the article that you sent me. Oh, by the way, Hello to all our moderators, to Valies and Zariel and Reckless Abandon and Alan Watson and Spartan Warrior Queen and GEC and Lady Cosmica. And I think I got everybody.
Yeah.
Yes, I think I got everybody that's moderating. Thank you very much. Thank you, David S., for that super chat as well to kick things off. And Wang Han, welcome to the Duran community. Alexander Valies, thank you for that super chat as well. And Commando Crossfire's quote says, all warfare is based on deception. And Commando Crossfire, I'm choosing a quote because, Alexander, you sent me an article from the Financial Times.
Yeah.
And the title of that article is Military Briefing. Russian losses mask Ukraine's vulnerabilities. It's behind a paywall.
Yeah.
But you sent me the full article. I read it. I took an excerpt from Clausewitz, which is coincidentally being referenced in the Financial Times article, which leads me to believe that the FT is watching our shows because we're the ones that are talking a lot about Clausewitz. Specifically, you're the one that that really covered the Russian military strategy to much of what Clausewitz talks about. And the title of this live stream is The Destruction of Armies rather than the Capture of Cities.
Yeah.
It looks like the Western mainstream media, slowly, day by day, as we have been talking about for the better part of 3 weeks, they are starting to prepare the people to understand the Russian strategy and the fact that Russia is grinding down the Ukraine army piece by piece, step by step, in a very slow, methodical, surgical manner. Yeah. And it has very much to do with the fact that they're using cauldrons, they're using humanitarian corridors, they're using diplomacy, but they're also focusing very much on the armies and not the cities. Yes. And it's a very different type of military strategy that we're seeing unfold. And it's working. It is working. And we're starting to see the Western mainstream media admit this, even though, Alexander, before you get into it, even though they still hold on to the narrative, and I think they need to hold on to this narrative, that the first week or two, Russia was getting demolished in this war, and suddenly they changed their strategy. My opinion, I don't agree with that. I think maybe there were some bumps along the way. Definitely, there were some bumps along the way, and there were some losses along the way. But I believe that that the Russians had their strategy in place and they've stuck to it. And we're starting to see it unfold now. It's being admitted by the Western mainstream media, and we're all seeing it take place. So, Alexander, military briefing: Russian losses mask Ukraine's vulnerabilities.
Indeed. I mean, it's a very, very interesting article because, of course, we've had little comments before up to now in the British media squirreled away about how the Ukrainian army in Donbass is threatened with encirclement. We've seen that in the London Times. We've seen that in the Daily Telegraph. This long article in the Financial Times was the first proper discussion of the subject. And if I can just go to it and quote one particular paragraph, which really stood out for me, it says, perhaps Ukraine's biggest tactical vulnerability is its joint forces operation, that's to say the Ukrainian army in the Donbass, where the bulk of Ukraine's military assets are deployed just west of Donetsk and Lugansk. Russia was seeking to encircle Ukraine's troops, Western officials said, cutting them off from Kiev and drawing them into open combined arms combat, which plays to its battle group's superiority. Crushing Ukraine's forces in such a way would be as much of a victory as capturing Kiev, some analysts said, invoking Karl von Clausewitz, the military theorist who saw the destruction of armies rather than the capture of cities as the fastest route to victory. So I think exactly as you said, Alex, they've probably been following us because we've been saying that this was the strategy, I think, pretty much from the outset. By the way, it's not difficult because what we've been saying is very consistent with what the Russians have themselves always said. The Russians, when they went in, they said, hello, Gonzalo. Just
hello, gentlemen.
Hello. Yes. Gonzalo, 1 sec. Keep on going, Alexander. Don't lose your train of thought. Keep on going.
No, well, what I was going to say is, I mean, what the Russians said right from the outset was that they would not attack They were not seeking civilian infrastructure, that their objective was Ukraine's demilitarization. Now, that clearly means the destruction of Ukraine's armed forces, or at least the key grouping of Ukraine's armed forces, which is the force in eastern Ukraine, which, as you correctly said, is methodically, bit by bit, being destroyed. It's being taken apart. And I dislike intensely the expression meat grinder, but that's a word that comes from that same financial.
A direct quote.
It's a direct quote from a Estonian military official who said, that the Ukrainian military is experiencing the Russian meat grinder. In other words, it's being crushed relentlessly as things are going. And I think you're completely correct. I think this is the Russian strategy from the outset. I don't think many people in the West understood it, because we tend to fight wars in a profoundly different way. And I think we didn't fully understand it. And we let ourselves in the West run away with wishful thinking, with images of heroic Ukrainians, with their Molotov cocktails and their broomsticks, pushing back the Russian tanks. I'm obviously exaggerating here, but single-handed one Ukrainian soldier, not by much. Single-handed Ukrainian soldier heroically throws back, column of Russian tanks. We've had lots and lots of things like that, and partly that flows from bafflement as to what the Russians have been doing, but we actually see it. And I'm going to just add one further observation, and this is not from me. It's again from a military person that I spoke to and discussed this with, who will remain anonymous, by the way, which is that one of the purposes of having all those Russian troops parked outside places like Kharkov and especially Kiev is to pin down Ukrainian soldiers there, so that they cannot reinforce the army, the main army, which is the one that's being encircled and destroyed, which is the army in the Donbass. In other words, it's strategy. It's something, again, we don't do very much of in the West nowadays. If you go back to the war against Iraq in 2003, we bombed everything that was there to bomb, and we just advanced in a straight line to Baghdad, which against an army like Saddam Hussein's, well, we could do. And there wasn't that much of resistance. But the Russians still do strategy. They still fight wars in the way that wars used to be fought. Some will say, no doubt, that they're being old-fashioned, but that's what they do. And if you understand their military philosophy, their approach to war, the political objectives they set out at the beginning of the war, then it all becomes comprehensible. And we've been saying it, all three of us have been saying it from the outset. And finally, the Financial Times has caught up.
All right, Gonzalo, before you jump in, because I know you have a lot to add to this, everyone, including ourselves, everyone is concerned about you, and everyone wants to know that you're safe. How are you? How are things?
I'm perfectly fine.
Are you okay?
It's so lovely. Thank you so much. But seriously, you don't have to worry about me. I'm perfectly fine. Alexander, as always, I bow down to the master, because you're absolutely right. And I'm going to tell you something that has been profoundly disillusioning to me during this experience, is that I've realized that the way that the West conducts wars is, I'm sorry to use this language, but there is no other way to say it. I think it's frankly evil. The idea of completely destroying cities and then rolling into them. I'm in Kharkov. I am in the center or near the center of the city, and there is cell phone reception. There is running water. There's electricity. There's heat. The civilian infrastructure is essentially intact. The Russians are advancing, and there's been, a suburb of Kharkov in the northwest has been completely destroyed. Because the Russians don't want to hit the civilians, but if the Zelensky regime's soldiers hide in the buildings, then they're going to attack them. And it's as simple as that. And we've seen this. There are videos circulating right now of a school in Odessa that has been turned into a military bunker. this is not like some random video. This was ABC News, the American broadcasting company. They had a reporter there observing this and how the school had been turned into essentially a military outpost, a military bunker. And so, of course, what are the Russians going to do? They're going to attack it, and they're going to try to obliterate it, as is their responsibility, because they want to, of course, win the war. And how do you do that? By taking out military targets. And if that means the military targets are in a school, that's very lamentable, but it'll have to be. And then, of course, you realize, then they'll turn this disaster into a PR victory to try to goad the West into joining into this conflict. I mean, the cynicism of the Zelensky regime knows no bounds.
Yes. I'm afraid cynicism is exactly right. And I'm afraid it's not just confined to the Zelensky regime, because the fact that this article is appearing in the Financial Times shows that there are people in the West, in Western governments, who understand very well what is going on. So given that they can see what's happening, and given that for the moment at least they're not going to join the war, and I think that will hold. I've come gradually to the view that this indeed is going to hold. I think they're becoming they're nervous about joining a conflict which could go horribly wrong for them. And I also get the impression, by the way, just to quickly say, that Zelensky's speech to Congress actually, far from winning people over, might even have annoyed a few influential people, with the reference to Pearl Harbor going down very badly, apparently, with some. But anyway, that's all I wanted to say about that. But if it is indeed the case that they understand within Western governments what's going on, then by encouraging Ukraine to fight on, all they are doing is leading to more loss of life, more destruction, and the more complete defeat of Ukraine. So cynicism all round.
Yeah, I completely agree. The other thing that is very noticeable the last few days, there was a strike at Rivne that again targeted foreign fighters and their equipment. And by my count, there was the attack outside of Lviv in the International Peacekeeping Center, which was basically a NATO outpost. That was, as I understand, the last numbers I saw were 237 soldiers killed, for sure, and probably twice that number of severely injured, and the whole outpost destroyed, and apparently $400 million worth of equipment, which is a pretty penny. Then there was the second one at Ivano-Frankivsk that also seems to have killed off about 100. And in this one, the number that was reported at Rivne, the number that's being reported so far is about 80. But that number will probably rise because it just happened. So we're talking 400 plus soldiers, foreign soldiers, and we can say conservatively twice that number of incapacitated, of casualties that will simply be ineffective in any kind of fighting context. So in one stroke, they seem to have taken out 1,200 soldiers in three separate strikes, precision strikes, high impact, very deadly strikes. I mean, this was not like the house-to-house fighting that you're seeing in Mariupol, where they're trying to not kill civilians and sort of like, no. This was, we're going to level this place. And, to be brutally frank, we're going to kill everybody who's here. That kind of attack, it must scare the NATO planners very, very deeply, extremely deeply. Yeah, I'm amazed.
Absolutely.
By it.
Absolutely. It must also show that the Russians have exceptionally good intelligence, because they know exactly where to hit, how, and where all these people are. And that, of course, corresponds with a lot of what we know about how deeply penetrated by Russian intelligence Ukraine is. So again, you're absolutely right. I've been hearing about this. I also understand that there was a strike by Russian missiles on a barracks in Nikolaev.
I didn't hear that.
Yeah, absolutely. About 50 people were killed there too. So those were apparently Ukrainians. or at least that's
Oh.
the official thing. But anyway, but I mean, you know, they know where to they know where to send these missiles and how
You
to
know
do it.
what bothers
Mm,
me so much about the
yeah.
propaganda, and I've thought about it very
Mm,
much. Why does it bother me so much? Because
mm,
I read the news and I read both sides, all sides, to
mm,
try to get a
yeah.
comprehensive picture. And
Mm,
I see that one side is consistently lying, and they are
yeah.
cheerleading and making people believe a reality that does not
Yeah.
exist. And I object to it so fiercely, and
Yes.
I've wondered why. And I've come to the following conclusion. What I realize is that from the very inception of this conflict, it was clear, like it or not, that the Russians were going to win because they are
Yes.
simply more. They're more and they're better equipped.
Yeah.
You can argue about the leadership, and nobody's arguing about the quality of the men of either side.
No.
I'm talking about simply as just just putting a couple of columns and listing the equipment of
Yes.
both sides. It was inevitable. But this cheerleading and lying nonsense, the Ghost of Kiev, the 13 Heroes of Snake Island, all these stories,
Yes.
these constant stories from blue check marks on Twitter claiming that the Ukrainian armed forces have obliterated 25 divisions and 500 aircraft and
Yeah.
nonsense like this. It encourages the Ukrainian armed forces to continue in a hopeless battle, in a hopeless
Yes.
conflict that will only end in their death. And that's the thing that bothers me the most, because you see, when
Yeah.
you have hope, you will give your last drop of energy.
Mm.
And that's a wonderful thing, but hope can be exceedingly dangerous, because if there's false hope, hope for an outcome that can never arrive, then you
Mm.
wind up sacrificing everything for something that is not achievable. And quite frankly, and I know that a lot of people who are pro-Ukraine will find this very, very tough to swallow and might lash out at me. And I've said this from the beginning, and it's caused a lot of problems, and a lot of people are very upset with me. But the fact has never changed. The Russians have the numbers on their side. Even if they were incompetently led and all their equipment was garbage, just by the fact of the sheer numbers, they are going to
Yeah.
win this conflict. And so the hope that so much of this propaganda inspires in babies, I mean 19-year-old kids, 22-year-old kids fighting and thinking that they might win,
Yeah.
it's just heartbreaking, because this is the flower of the nation, and it
Yeah.
will be killed off for nothing.
Yeah.
I'm sorry, I'm very
You're
emotional about the subject.
Gonzalo, I feel exactly the same way as you. Now, just 2 quick points about what you've just said. Firstly, the quote often attributed to Lenin, quite possibly actually said by him: "Quantity has a quality all of its own."
Yes.
Never forget that,
Yes.
especially in
Yes.
war. It is absolutely true. And I'm not, by the way, saying that the Russians are less good than the Ukrainians. And I'm sure in some respects, and certainly in many technologies, it's decisively the opposite. But at the end of the day, you're absolutely right. If you're outnumbering, if there are more of you, you are going to win in the end. I mean,
Yes.
that's clearly true. Now, on the second point about giving people false hope, I have knowledge of this. Now, my wife's family is half German, and I've often spoken to the older generation, most of whom now have passed away. In fact, I think all of them but one has passed away, but they've often told me about the war, the Second World War, and about the last stages of the war, and the extraordinary success of Germany's information systems, its ability to keep fighting by pumping out false hopes that something would happen, there'd be new weapons, the leader had some great plan, the allies were going to argue with each other. They were doing this all the time, and of course every German soldier was able to defeat 15 Americans and 25 Russians single-handed. And of course, when it all ended in defeat, which it eventually did, the disillusion was incredibly profound. And the whole post-war generation of Germans, right up to the time when I knew them, was still affected by it. They felt profoundly, deeply betrayed. And many of them, as you rightly said, they'd lost their sons, they'd lost their brothers, they'd lost their fathers, They knew people friends who died, and it was all for nothing. And I
Yes.
think that we must never, ever encourage people into hopeless struggles by promoting hopes that are really not going to be fulfilled. And I think there is something profoundly immoral and wrong about that.
Yes, yes, I completely agree, and it's just it breaks my heart. Anyway, to turn the topic a little bit to the situation here in Kharkov, which I know you gentlemen will be interested in,
Yeah.
and I want to give you the situation on the ground.
Yeah.
I have some information of Mariupol, and in fact, I'm going to be doing after talking with you gentlemen, I'm going to do a whole video, a live stream on Mariupol. And but before I talked about Mariupol, let me talk a little bit about Kharkov. Well, there is the suburb in the northwest, sort of like a satellite city suburb called Saltivka. It's Salt-Ivka, salt like the salt that you put in your food, IVKA. For those of you interested, Google it. It's a suburb, like I said, to the northeast of the city. And that was the scene of, I've been wondering, the last week that there was like major shelling going on. And that was where it was. You see, when you're in the middle of a city under siege, many times you don't know what's happening because you're just worried about, your own little your own little space, where you can find food, and where you can find safety in case of any kind of bombardment or whatever. And so you're not really aware or have the possibility to know more about what's going on around you. But I've gotten a couple of contacts who have told me in some detail what's been going on. And Saltivka, this suburb, was the scene of a major battle, and it's been essentially annihilated. And the Russian forces have broken through it. And that's why, as of today, I'm seeing the shelling and explosions just a lot closer. Saltivka, to give you a perspective, is about 10 kilometers in a straight line from the historic center of Kharkov. Okay. And it's in my own case, it's practically, I have the city center between myself and that area. And so I'm unconcerned, but what's been happening is that the Russian forces have broken through Saltivka and they are moving forward. And once they've broken through, they are essentially in the network of the metro stations of the city. So they're in the city. And what is clear is that, the idea was to squeeze from the east, north and the east, squeeze the city, and this pushed everybody west. And on the west side of town is the train station, and the train tracks all of them lead to the west. Some of them circle around and go south, and some circle north, but that seems to be the idea of just squeezing from east to west. And at the pace things are going, it's reasonable to expect the Russians to have control of downtown Kharkov, certainly within, say, a week. It would be reasonable at the pace that they are going. It certainly sounds that they're getting closer, sometimes hour by hour. Okay, that's the story insofar as Kharkov is concerned. In Mariupol, the story I've been hearing is humanitarian. Now, this comes directly from a person whom I know from long before this conflict. This person is not in Ukraine, but this person was simply outside of Ukraine when this all started. And this person has family in Mariupol. She's from there. And her parents and aunt and uncle have finally left, and they've traveled to Rostov under the humanitarian corridor implemented by the Russians. The Russians are taking them to Rostov of their own free will. And this acquaintance, this friend, she told me that her parents and aunt and uncle, the big problem was that they were starving. That was the major problem of the situation, and that they were not allowed to leave by the Zelensky regime forces, specifically the Azov battalion that seemed to be in charge. And the stories told were shocking. And the thing is, when you hear these stories, you think, oh, this sounds like propaganda. You know, like the stories of, I don't know, in the first Gulf War, when they said that, oh, the Iraqi soldiers came into the neonatal center and let the babies die and stuff like that. You're like, oh, this is propaganda. But the stories she was telling me were very true. She said that her parents and aunt and uncle had seen people trying to leave and getting their cars shot up and likely killed. They had seen all kinds of human rights violations, but I mean egregious ones during the conflict. And you know, a lot of the stories coming out of Mariupol are kind of horrifying. And the thing is, it's not that the Russians did this. On the contrary, the populace in Mariupol views the Russians as their liberators and saviors. And apparently, one of the big things was that they were able to eat food. And apparently it was quite traumatic, if you will. And so that is the situation in Mariupol. But even though there is still resistance, and at the end of the day, it seems that that whole city is going to be leveled in order to expunge these individuals. Yeah, that seems to be the case. I just want to tell you that, but this is, like, I know this person. I mean, this is a true story. This is real. This is actually happening. And so I just wanted to tell you that. Go ahead.
Gonzalo, that's incredibly useful. Can I just say, in the British media, the story is that people who are leaving Mariupol and are going to Russia are being abducted by the Russians.
No,
complete lie. I mean, it's the accepted narrative here. You find it all over the media, and of course, there's a lot of discussion about this being a huge war crime and that kind of thing. So it's very, very useful to hear from you about information from eyewitnesses, actual people there, which flatly contradict that account. But that is one thing that I have to say. The media here have been telling us the total opposite. Now, I just wanted to mention something you mentioned about the railway station, that the railway station in Kharkov is, I think you said, in the west of the city. And
it's northwest,
people are being pushed in that direction. Now, I am not familiar with the geography of any of these cities, neither of Kharkov nor of Kiev, but I wonder whether this isn't partly also what's going on in Kiev, in the sense that what I am hearing, and again, this has to be said, it comes from Russian sources, I want to make this very clear, is that the Russians have not fully encircled Kiev. They have deliberately left open access to the south, so that if people want to leave the city, they can. And apparently something like half the population has in fact done so. So that, you know, again, there's lots of discussions about why haven't the Russians fully encircled Kiev. They made a choice not to, if this is correct. And it seems consistent with what you've been saying about Kharkov. They're deliberately leaving these places so that Ukrainian civilians, well, the people who live in these cities, and arguably, I would say also, I am sure Ukrainian troops, if they were chose to, could withdraw.
That's the whole point. That's the point.
Exactly.
That's the point. Yeah. And I would make one correction of what you said. I think that at least 3/4 of the population of Kiev has left. I can speak about Kharkov. Yesterday, I spent about 4 or 5 hours, closer to 4, walking around like downtown and walking around it. I tried to live stream, which I could, but I was too scared because I was worried of like some army person, because there are a lot of army people keeping an eye on things. And what I noticed is that if I had to guess, I'd say that at least 90% of the population in the center of the city is gone. They're just gone. And like a lot of European cities, the center is bustling with people and commerce and all the rest of it. It's not like in the United States where you have just offices. No. There's people live there, and they're all gone. And so if you tell me that in Kiev half the population is gone, I would actually be sort of surprised. I'd say no, it must be more, because here in Kharkov, 90%.
Yeah. The person who said that half the population has left. Now, I'm saying this from memory. I couldn't give you a reference, but I'm
Oh
sure
yeah,
this
yeah,
is
don't
right.
worry. Yeah,
Was Kiev's mayor Klitschko himself?
yeah,
So
yeah,
I'm assuming that you could take that as the minimum if you like. I'm sure you're right.
yeah,
By the way, I'm sure
yeah.
many more people have left than that. But that's clearly the plan: is to drain these
Yes.
cities of people to minimize casualties, which is appropriate. I mean, it seems to
Well,
be a
no,
sensible thing to
yeah,
do.
and also here's another thing
Mhm.
that people don't understand, which I have repeated, and I think I might have
Yeah,
repeated in this show,
yeah,
and I'll repeat it again if you don't mind.
mhm,
The whole point for the Russians of humanitarian corridors is, of course,
yeah,
to drain the cities of civilians. Yes, sure, but it's
yeah,
also to encourage deserters,
yes,
because how do you get rid of an opposing army? You kill
yeah,
him, you capture him, or you get him to desert. Either one of
yes,
those three options is the same
yeah,
outcome as a
yes,
practical matter for you. And so they want these humanitarian corridors to work, to drain out the civilians
yeah,
and to drain out
yes,
the fighters who are not so convinced. And so the notion that the Russians would fire on the humanitarian corridors makes
yeah,
absolutely no sense, because it would
yes,
discourage deserters. And so
yes,
what's obviously happening, and the Mariupol witnesses are confirming this, that the Ukrainian armed forces, or at least the Azov battalion in Mariupol, they were deliberately firing on the
yeah,
fleeing civilians. This is,
yeah,
we have eyewitness accounts, and we have, by the way, there was
yeah,
a surprising number of Greeks in Mariupol, which
yeah.
I never thought of,
Oh
and
yeah.
I
Well, it's
read
yeah,
somewhere.
Go on. I'll chime in on that. Go on,
Yeah,
Gonzalo, because I've got some
yeah,
information on that. Go on.
yeah, because I saw a news account, a Greek news account in English, the Greek City Life or something like that. Greek Life. I have it here on my phone. I can show it to you later and send you a link. And it said that Greek citizens had fled from Mariupol, and they confirmed this. And so, obviously, a Greek citizen in Greece has no need to lie about anything.
mm,
You could argue, oh yes, of course, Ukrainians in Rostov, Russia, of course they're going to lie to please
mm,
their Russian prison guards, right? But a Greek citizen in Greece has no compunction, no fear of any kind of retribution. They will be telling
mm,
the truth, and they are confirming these accounts that I'm telling you, that it was the Zelensky regime
mm,
thugs who were shooting on them. And so the point I want to make is that you see, every time some atrocity
mm,
happens, it's usually on the Zelensky regime side, and they apply it to the Russians.
mm.
It's like this weird sort of projection, which I think is psychopathic. But anyway, that's a separate conversation. I wanted to tell you that. And Alex, you were saying about the Greeks in Mariupol.
Yeah, I mean, I'll just relay what's happening here with the Greek media, because there are a lot of Greeks in Mariupol, as well as Odessa and a lot of the region, and Crimea as well. A lot of the region in the
Yeah,
in the south of
yeah,
Ukraine, but especially Mariupol. The Greek media is been the mainstream media has been firmly behind whatever the EU position has
yeah,
been, which is firmly behind Ukraine and very anti-Russian. That's the Greek mainstream media. So as this operation in Mariupol has been unfolding, the Greek mainstream media has been having a very difficult time
mm,
squaring the circle between what regular, everyday Ukrainians of Greek origin have been
yeah,
reporting and what they have been saying, especially those
yeah,
Greeks who have returned, who are now in Greece essentially as refugees,
mm,
and what they have been reporting, given the orders that they get from the EU and the
mm,
propaganda that they're trying to relay to Greeks about how the operation is going.
mm,
And what they have done here, what I've noticed, is they have many high-level officials from Mariupol at a very high administrative government level of Greek origin, and they are describing the events unfolding in Mariupol as a war crime being committed by the Russians and by the Russian military. But I've
Mm-hmm.
noticed these are very high-level officials, including various
Mm-hmm.
like local mayors of various districts, and they're urging the
Mm-hmm.
West to get involved, i.e., the
Mm-hmm.
no-fly zones and NATO and all of these things.
Mm-hmm.
A majority of the everyday people of Greek
yeah,
origin who are from that area have been confirming exactly what you are saying, Gonzalo. For example, here's a quote, and I'm reading this from a Greek newspaper, a local newspaper, which is a quote of a Greek in the area who says, quote, nobody kills anyone here. The Russians do not kill anyone. No one is shooting at civilians. As soon as the Russians came here, they immediately brought us help. Right now, immediately after the shooting stopped. No one asks us if you are Ukrainian or Greek about our origin, what language you speak. The Russians do not discriminate, while the Ukrainians did. They forced us to speak only Ukrainian, although I do not know it at all. And another Greek girl who is now in Greece as a refugee says, let me just translate. They stopped us, the Ukrainian soldiers, and they threatened us. The soldiers in Russian tanks tried to tell us to calm down. And this is making the rounds. It's going viral. This, all these Twitter interviews of these Ukrainian Greeks who are now here on refugee status. So that's, I mean, the Greek media is having a very difficult time, the Mitsotakis government, a very difficult time trying to square the circle as far as the narrative being pushed out with regards to this conflict here, because the Greek establishment and the mainstream media has been firmly and squarely behind the position of the EU, which is, as we all know, the position of the United States and the position of the Zelensky government.
And I understand the Greek consul in Mariupol has also been basically following the party line from set by Athens. I mean, he's been very much promoting the NATO line too. Just as a matter of quick historical record, there have been Greeks in the Black Sea since, well, before forever. But a very, very large community in Mariupol, specifically invited there by Catherine the Great to develop the tobacco industries, because the Greeks were very good at tobacco. So that was where so a lot of Greeks emigrated to that part of the world in the 18th century and thereafter. And of course, there's been a big Greek community in Odessa, which is rather different. But I also happen to know people from this part of the world, Mariupol Greeks. And one of the things I also know is that the community, the Greek people in this part of Ukraine were never happy with the events, the Maidan events on 2014. Overwhelmingly, they opposed them. But so it's a well-known historic community. But don't assume all these names, these Greek names that are given to all these cities, Mariupol, Odessa, Tiraspol, Kherson, whatever, have any great ancient Greek origins. They are all invented for them by Catherine the Great and Potemkin, because they wanted to give a sort of Greek flavor to this part of the empire. So that's why they came up with all of these names. The only actual Greek name given to a city by Greeks is Yalta, which is a
really?
Yalta means the seaborne horizon, but all the others, Odessa is named after the Greek hero Odysseus, for example. Sevastopol is the city of the empress, who was Catherine. So these are not really Greek names as such. They are in Greek, but they are actually chosen by Catherine and Potemkin. Just a little piece of history there.
Thank you. I had no idea, and I'm glad I've learned this. That's really fascinating, actually.
So let's move on to another question that I have for both of you guys, your thoughts and your comments. From what I understand, Biden will be making a trip to Poland. I believe he is going to be going to Poland. Boris Johnson is flirting with the idea of taking a trip, as did the Polish prime minister, the Czech Republic, and the Slovenian government officials, taking a trip to Kiev to show his support for Zelensky. He is flirting with this idea. Zelensky gave many speeches over the past week to the Canadian Parliament, to the U.S. Congress, to the German Parliament, and he gave a disastrous speech. It turned out to be a disaster to the Israeli Knesset. What do you guys make of all of these events that are taking place now? And you may even want to tie in, if it is relevant, some of the Hunter Biden revelations, which are coincidentally breaking as well, and it is not a coincidence at all. This is happening anyway. Alexander Gonzalo, what are your thoughts on this diplomatic geopolitical activity taking place.
Just on the topic of Zelensky's speeches, the other one that went down extremely badly was the one he made to the German parliament, the Bundestag. And there's been contrasts made, standing ovations in, when he addresses Congress and the House of Commons. When he spoke to the Bundestag, there was a minute's polite applause. I mean, it didn't go down well at all. Don't think that has any meaning or relevance, but he doesn't come across well in all the places where he speaks to. Anyway, that's all I wanted to say about that. All this diplomacy, frenetic diplomatic activity, they're going around in circles. Johnson going to Kiev, if he does in fact ever go to Kiev, what will that achieve? It's a PR stunt. Biden coming to Europe, another PR stunt. We're going to have a G7 meeting. We're going to have a NATO meeting, I believe. We're going to have an EU Council meeting. But as far as I can tell, they are repeating themselves. They may escalate sanctions pressure on the Russians, but I think any expectation now that Russia will crack under the sanctions is gradually draining away. And I think we saw that article, which I shared with you, Alex. We haven't sent it to Gonzalo, actually, but I should do, in which somebody was in BNE, the economics journal, about the sanctions have now turned into a circular firing squad. They're shooting themselves ultimately. I mean, that is what they're now doing. But anyway, so we're going to have all of these people, all of the leaders of the West coming together in Europe, unless they're prepared to dramatically escalate by becoming directly involved in the conflict, which, please God, they don't. Then I can't help but think that we've now reached that inflection point where instead of looking strong, they're going to start looking weak. And they're just going to look increasingly like a talking shop, even as events on the ground actually turn against them. I remember very much how that started to be the way during the siege of Aleppo in Syria in 2016. But of course, that was far away. That was Syria. It didn't matter to people in so many ways. And besides, people in Europe were very conflicted about it. Even Boris Johnson was, by the way. But with Ukraine, which has become this big, big, big issue, inevitably, it seems to me, unless they take the plunge and go for outright escalation, which all their military people have told them, for heaven's sake, don't even think about it. All that's going to happen is that they're going to come away looking weak and ineffectual. And none more so than Biden himself, who, as you rightly say, is facing growing political difficulties in the United States. And interestingly, there's been no upward bump for him in the opinion polls in the US at all.
Oh, no. The opinion polls, insofar as the Biden administration are concerned, are in the toilet. I mean, like, half of the population thinks that he's doing a very bad job. Yeah, you can't continue unless you break out of this somehow. And frankly, and this is just a reality. He's too old. He's too old, and he's senile. He's frail. And so this, all of a sudden, the New York Times comes out of the blue, as far as I can tell, and says that the Hunter Biden laptop story, it was all true. And that Hunter Biden laptops thing, the evidence there that New York Times is now saying is true. We're talking the most egregious offenses. I mean, financial shenanigans. It's not merely sexual impropriety. We're talking about sexual crimes against children. I mean, it's grotesque. All right. I mean, somebody once said that just merely having possession of that laptop could make you a felon because of the stuff. It's so radioactive. The thing practically, it can kill you dead in 5 seconds. I mean, like uranium or something. But the point is that if this is coming out, I heard somebody say this expression. I heard a great disturbance in the force. There's this sense that the tide has shifted on the Biden administration, and that the establishment has realized he's going down. Do I want to be attached to him as he goes down? And I think that all of a sudden, a lot of bureaucrats, a lot of people in the Democratic National Committee, they're just all of a sudden realizing we have to cut our losses somehow. And that's
Yes.
why the story is emerging. I think that they're laying the groundwork to eject him. But I know that they don't want to have Kamala Harris, because Kamala Harris is an idiot. I mean, a true fool. Her performance
Yes.
in Poland and Romania were catastrophic. I mean,
Yeah.
my God, it
Mm.
was incredible. And so they have to figure out a way to get rid of Kamala and get rid of Joe Biden. And they test marketed Pete Buttigieg, the transportation secretary, and he didn't fly. He's the one, he was McKinsey, and a lot of people say that he might be intelligence. He actually did work in military intelligence.
Yeah.
And so, they test drove him, but he did not appeal to the average person. They considered him too robotic, too lacking in any kind of humanity. And so they're trying to figure out a way to get out of this hole, because the November 2022 elections are going to be catastrophic. The midterm election, for non-American viewers, it's the entirety of the House of Representatives and a third of the Senate, plus a whole bunch of governorships across the country. It's going to be a catastrophe. The Democrats are holding on to a microscopically slim majority. And so they are going to lose badly. And so the issue becomes, how do they save the sinking ship? And it seems with this New York Times article that they've decided to eject Joe Biden. What do you gentlemen think of that?
I'm entirely in agreement with you. I agree with your legal analysis of its contents. I think that charges of Hunter Biden are now definitely looming. I mean, I'm want to be always careful about saying things like that, but I think that there's been reports circulating. The fact that the laptop has now been basically validated, I can't really see how that can be prevented now. The very fact that they've done that shows, however, I mean, instead of burying this story, that it's now coming to the forefront. I'm going to say straightforwardly, if proceedings like that, if criminal proceedings are brought against the president's son, given the fact that the president himself is regularly referenced in material in this laptop, and I want to be very careful here. I'm not making any specific allegations. I want to make that very clear. But he is referenced, given that we had people like Tony Bobrinsky, the witness, who is now looking like he was telling the truth, has also said things about the president himself. And the role that he had. Well, at the very least, it seems to me, if the congressional elections turn out the way everybody expects, and I completely agree with your analysis there, Gonzalo, then it seems to me that we have, to say it straightforwardly, a very strong possible impeachment case coming.
Yeah.
And I mean, bear in mind also that the laptop story circulated 3 weeks before the election. Biden could have come out at that point and said to the American people what would have been true. Yes, that is my son's laptop, but he didn't. So you can deceive people by omission as well, and I think that is something else that could come up in impeachment proceedings, by the way, because it goes directly to the heart of how the president was elected. Remember, the question of the laptop was brought up in one of the television debates between himself and Trump. So he went along with the story that it was all Russian disinformation, might not actually even be real. So given all of this, it seems to me that his position come November, if the midterms turn out to be as bad as people say, is going to be extremely vulnerable if there's a Republican majority. But I wonder anyway whether, given the information that's coming out about that laptop, whether he can survive as president at all. Whether, in fact, in this kind of situation, people might come along and say to him from the DNC, from wherever, well, Mr. President, you're shot. I mean, you can't really hope to turn things around before November. After November, impeachment proceedings are going to come. Even if we have we retain a third of the Senate, which we presumably will, because these are American elections, it's going to be very, very difficult to persuade some senators, some Democratic senators, to continue to vote for you, given the feelings that people will have about this. So impeachment is looking now like a very real prospect. So in the interests of the party and the nation, perhaps the best thing you should do is go. In Britain, that would certainly be the position. I think we might be very close to seeing that in the United States. And by the way, there is one way, always, and one must never forget this, that one can sort out the Kamala Harris problem. And I'm not saying that's going to happen. I'm just saying that this option exists, which is impeach her as well. And I'm sure there's all sorts of things you can bring up there as well.
Well,
the
question that I have. Go ahead, Gonzalo.
I lost the point I was trying to make. Go ahead, Alex.
Okay, well, the question that I have for you guys and for everyone that's watching us is, obviously this is no coincidence that you have this admission from the New York Times. So who is behind this ultimately? Because we know the New York Times is doing this under the orders of someone else or some other group. Who is behind this and why? Is this about, and we know this is connected to Ukraine. There's obviously it's connected to Ukraine. Is this about escalating the situation, or is this about de-escalating the situation?
That's a really good question, and that's actually kind of like the point I wanted to make, because there are multiple possibilities here. You see, if this comes out, the Hunter Biden laptop, and Joe Biden, or more correctly, the Biden family, headed by Jill Biden, because she's the brains behind that operation right now. I mean, poor Joe, he's out to lunch, right? He doesn't even know where he is half the time. And so, she might be thinking that this is coming at us. So might it be best to lash out? Okay, lash out like militarily, go NATO and invade Western Ukraine and see what happens. Roll the dice in that direction. And so it could be that some other group, say for instance the Hillary Clinton camp, wants to get rid of Joe Biden, and they're the ones pushing this New York Times to get rid of Joe Biden. Yeah. Or it also could be, and I can't believe the Byzantine kind of quality of this analysis that I'm giving you. It could be the military-industrial complex that wants to push this a little bit forward as a threat to the Biden family and say, see, if you don't lash out and attack Ukraine, attack the Russians in Ukraine, then we're going to let all these secrets come out. Frankly, because of how weak Joe Biden is, there are so many different factions jockeying for position that you can't really tell where anything is coming from. I mean, Alexander, tell me if you think that my analysis of the two possible camps pushing the story forward is accurate, because that's how I'm seeing it.
I'm afraid it's completely accurate. And notice also that it's come out in the New York Times. Now, the New York Times is obviously very Democrat aligned. And as we know, he's got very, very great connections, very strong connections with the intelligence community. So it looks as if, to me, it must be coming from some of those sources, the Democrats and or the intelligence community, because they're the people who have told the New York Times to run with this story at this particular time. Now, they are the people, of course, who have run this thing with Ukraine to the point of absolute crisis. Now, the big question for me is simply this. Is it because these people are now getting cold feet, that they're looking at the situation, they're saying this has got completely out of control? Joe promised us that the sanctions wouldn't go beyond Nord Stream 2, the technology ban, and the individual sanctions against Russian banks. And instead, we've had this explosion. We've had this decision to go after the central bank. The Fed is absolutely livid about this. The Wall Street banks are absolutely livid about this. We're seeing oil, it has its ups and downs, but overall, the trend is clearly up. We're seeing a complete mess, and there's always the danger with Joe that he might actually go and do something absolutely reckless and crazy. So we've got to find somebody else to come in, bring this whole situation under control, keep the situation in Congress at least from completely falling apart, and at the same, losing completely in Congress, seeing what we can do to retrieve the situation. So that's one possible angle. Unfortunately, when we're just talking about the Democrats, and my impression of the Democrats is that they absolutely hate Russia. The Democrats hate Russia. The Republicans hate Iran, but each of them hates a particular country, and the Democrats hate Russia. And when we're looking at the intelligence community, who, shall we say, are not people who've shown much empathy with Russian concerns over the last few years. But when one is looking at them as well, one has to worry that it's the other way, that they're looking to put either pressure on Joe as part of an internal conflict within the administration, or perhaps to remove him and to replace him with somebody who's going to be much harder and who will escalate this even further, because they may be saying to themselves, well, this all started as a regime change attempt in Moscow. We were going to provoke the economic crisis there. We were going to provoke the financial collapse. There's going to be this mass uprising against Putin. I sent you both, before this program, an article in The Guardian which showed that the exact opposite has happened, that there's been not just that the financial situation in Moscow has stabilized, but that Putin's support for Putin amongst the Russian population is rising to the point where a pro-Western polling agency in Russia has had to conceal the results of an opinion poll, which showed
so
how strong. I know it is, absolutely. But that was in The Guardian. I mean, this isn't. We're not getting this from Russian sources. But given that the regime change operation failed, but we are still committed to it, that may be the outlet of these people. How do we achieve our objective? Well, all that we've thrown at the Russians up to now hasn't worked. So let's throw in the last big card. Let's declare a no-fly zone. Let's send the S-300 missiles from Slovakia into Ukraine. Let's twist the arms of the Turks and get them to send the S-400 missiles to Ukraine. Let's escalate in some massive, incredibly dangerous, apocalyptic way in order to try to save this enterprise, which is falling apart in our hands. And to be honest, I just don't know which of the two it is. I don't think anybody knows.
No.
Head,
we'll know
my
years
head tells
from now.
me, yeah, exactly. My head tells me it's the first, the people who are looking for some way to de-escalate and get out of this hole. But my head could very easily be wrong, because as Alex and I were saying at the start of this program, it's a situation at the moment where nobody is thinking or calculating or reasoning. Emotion and anger has taken charge, and things are spiraling out of control. So I don't know which it is.
Yeah, but if this is about
it's panic.
Go ahead, Alex. Alexander Gonzalo, if this is about getting this escalation and getting the no-fly zone and getting NATO involved in this, then they only have what is plus or minus a 1-month window. Yeah. Because I think we're all in agreement that this is going to wind down, that Russia's going to wind this down, and they're going to get what they want within. I don't want to put timelines, but I think we all agree a 1-month window. Once again, plus or minus, we don't know. Yes, but they only have a 1-month window. So this is more about neutralizing Biden or getting Biden to go along with their escalation rather than removing him. Now, if it is about removing him, then it's not about the escalation. It's more about just getting him out of the way so that they can move on to whatever the next phase of their operation is.
Yes. Actually, I think it's less time than a month, to tell you the truth. Because it's looking clear that something is happening in Belarus. And it looks like there's going to be an invasion from southwest Belarus.
You also put out a tweet about a false flag in Sumy as well. Sorry to cut you off. Before I forget, you put out something about that as well. Yeah.
Well, that seemed to have wound down today because it was the Russian Ministry of Defense that came out and said the Zelensky regime is putting explosives on ammonia tanks, and as soon as the Russians enter Sumy, they're going to blow those tanks and blame it on the Russians. And because the mayor of Sumy was saying that shelling was affecting this chemical plant, a Russian shelling. And as soon as this Minister of Defense statement came out, all of a sudden the mayor's like, "Oh, we have it under control," and kind of like died down. It's weird, and sometimes the Slavic mind, there's all kinds of 3D chess going on behind the scenes, and so who knows? I tweeted it out, but it was not. So it was more like we have to keep an eye on this. But what seems to be the case is that, and this would actually make military sense, that in Belarus they are preparing they have some columns there that it looks, and this is a big caveat, but it seems as if it might be a jumping off point to slice through Western Ukraine between the city of Lviv, which is the westernmost city of Ukraine, and the Polish border. If that guillotine slices across and essentially cuts off any kind of escape, it becomes a barrier to any kind of intervention from the West. The issue becomes, when is this going to happen? And I mean, first of all, is it happening? That's what it seems. There are indirect, bits of indirect evidence that seem to point to this, and not to mention some satellite photographs. And so it could be that the window is a lot shorter than a month. But insofar as looking at the situation here right now, like I told you, Kharkov, give it, okay, let's be generous and say that they sew everything up by the first week of April. And insofar as Kiev is concerned, I don't think they're ever going to shell it. I think that they have, the Russians, for historic reasons, they do not want to see Kiev, the city, harmed. And so I think that they'll just simply surround it and wait it out. That might be the most effective strategy, quite frankly. And so that would mean that by the end of April, it would be all over. I mean, at this point, that's what I'm estimating, that it's going to be at the end of April. By April 30th, we're done here. And they're going to bring back Medvedchuk, and they're going to install him as president. And quite frankly, I think that under Medvedchuk, they'll start some sort of federated system in Ukraine, whereby the south and east are separate, are administratively separate from the center and west, and slowly guided towards a partition, I think, which I've said before, and this bothers a lot of Ukrainians, but I think that economically, culturally, psychologically, socially, it would be better if the predominantly Ukrainian side of the country and the predominantly Russian side of the country had a divorce. And it might prove long-term to be beneficial for everyone involved, but that's how I'm seeing it now. My thinking is the end of April, but dude, I am so wrong with my predictions that it could be, that it lasts, God knows how long.
Well, can I just, on the question of predictions, go back to that Financial Times article, because there was one date that immediately stood out for me, which is that in that article, which that they seem to be thinking, and this is the Financial Times and its various military analysts, that we could start to see dramatic things start to happen in Ukraine in this war from the Russians sometime around mid-April. Now, that seems to correspond very, very closely with your feeling of the situation, Gonzalo. And, you may not be a military man any more than I am, but you're there. You have your finger on the pulse of what's actually going on there. So I did notice that particular point about the date. So I think you may be right there. By the way, I can hear the sirens once more.
Yeah, I'm sorry about that. They go off.
No.
And sometimes for no reason at all.
It also does give a certain drama to your
Yes,
your
it
things.
does.
It also, and I'm going to say this also, Gonzalo, and I'm going to say it does make me concerned for you also, because it does always remind me that you really are in a war zone. But anyway,
the great thing about the sirens is that when I say something now, people pay much more attention because they think I'm going to blow up any second now. No, but thank you so much for your concern. But don't worry about it. It's just a loud racket. It's kind of like the dogs. Only your dogs, right? But only not so cute. I mean, I wish I had a dog right now. So don't worry about it. And I'm so sorry about the annoyance. I mean, truly.
It's not an annoyance at all. I mean, you come over very clearly. I just hear it very softly in the background. Hearing being perhaps the one sense that I have that works extremely well. Anyway, the other thing I wanted to say on Kiev, by the way, just very quickly, I saw that Klitschko, the mayor, has announced a 1.5 day curfew So
A
Kiev is
what?
closing down today and won't
Hmm.
reopen until Wednesday.
What's the point of that?
Well, that's a very good question. He's not given any real explanation. But, it does look as if things in Kiev aren't going particularly well either. So 1.5-day curfew.
Yeah,
Uh,
the Russians just blew up the largest shopping center in Kiev. They shelled it because it was a staging area for the
yeah,
Zelensky regime people.
yeah,
And so they just leveled it. It was just a big disaster, and apparently 4 people died. But that's the thing. See, the Zelensky regime is putting its soldiers in places that will cause harm. Like, for instance, the steelworks in Mariupol. The Azov battalion people. There was some Twitter blue checkmark system pig who said that the Russians were systematically destroying civilian infrastructure. And I was like, no, that's a lie. That's a complete lie. What has happened was that the Russians had to shell the steelworks in Mariupol because that's where the Azov battalion had gone to hide and seek shelter.
yeah,
And so that's why they're doing it.
yeah.
And this thing of the Zelensky regime happily putting its men, its soldiers, in places that will ultimately harm the civilian population, if not harm civilians themselves. And we have seen the documentation, Azov battalion documentation, explaining exactly how to use civilians as human shields. I posted it on Twitter. Alex, unfortunately, for reasons I can't really do it on the phone, but if you can find that tweet to share with everybody,
Let me look for it. Let me look for
it
it.
shows the Azov battalion telling their own people that what they should do is use the upper floors of the buildings and put on the ground floor any vehicle or tank inside a building, and use the 3rd, 4th, and 5th floors of any building to hold civilians as hostages. I mean, they have it's there, it's real. That's what they're doing. And the Western media lies constantly, which it really drives me up the wall. It really, because like I said before, it gives false hope. The lies of the Western media give false hope, which leads to needless suffering and needless death of people who have all of their lives ahead of them, and who don't deserve to die this way. On a personal note, I've seen a lot of photographs of these bombings, of these different strikes, and you see, at the end of the day, in death, no one has a uniform, and all of these soldiers, young men, full of energy and promise, and they're dying for nothing, for in a war that no amount of bravery is going to change the outcome. It's simply just not.
Is this
going
the
to
tweet,
happen.
Gonzalo?
Yeah, that's the one. Thank you so much. Thank you. Yeah.
This specifically, this diagram.
Yes. Yeah, and you see how these. I mean, they're animals. How can you even think of doing such a thing? And the thing is, see, when I saw that a few, like a week or so ago or earlier, and I thought, maybe Russian propaganda. But with the Mariupol civilians giving this testimony, the Greek Ukrainians in Greece giving this testimony, my personal acquaintance, whom I know and has nothing to do whatsoever with any kind of intelligence op or FSB or Ministry of Defense nonsense. No, she's just a regular person, and she's telling me this of her parents and aunt and uncle, and she can tell me their names, and here they're here. And this is true. This is true. This is what's actually happening, and the Western media lies for political gain. It's so despicable. I'm sorry for ranting, but I get very emotionally invested in the situation because of the needless death of so many young people who have all their lives ahead of them. I'm sorry.
Gonzalo, you shouldn't apologize. I feel the same way. Alex,
how long do you think Zelensky can keep this up? Because we talk a lot about the information war, and there's no doubt that that the West has won.
Alex, I have an answer.
So there's no doubt that the West has won the information war, or is winning the information war, and Russia is not doing too well in the information war, except on the domestic front. I mean, inside Russia, they're okay. But outside Russia, Russia's losing badly on the domestic front, which, by the way, kind of destroys the narrative that Russia with $4,000 can sway a U.S. election because they're such information war masters. But anyway, aside from that, how long do you think Zelensky can keep this up? Because I am starting to see on a lot of comments, a lot of streams that talk about this subject, streams that are also pro Biden, pro Ukraine, in the middle. There are people that are starting to say he's an actor. He's an actor. He's an actor. I'm seeing this pop up a lot now. How long do you think Zelensky can keep this up?
Oh, me. Let me answer this.
Yes, go ahead.
Sorry,
Yes,
Alexander, please.
No, please. No. I'm waiting for you.
I tweeted about this. I'm saying Zelensky is going to flee. When things get ugly, he's going to leave the country if he hasn't already. There are rumors that we all know that he's in Poland already, but be that as it may. But he will flee, before the ultimate collapse of his regime, and he will go to the West, and he will go on every talk show, every podcast, every interview show, news show, and you in the West are going to be stuck with him. Because the Russians are basically going to be throwing a Zelensky bomb at you. And I assure you, after he has wallpapered your media environment with his nonsense, his baloney, you're going to be wishing that the Russians had nuked you instead of sending this Zelensky bomb at you. That's my statement on Zelensky.
To answer your question, I think that the worm of doubt is starting to increase and grow. I mean, I really do. Now, so far, it's very much confined to elite publications like the FT, the Financial Times. I mean, the article we've seen there. I see a lot more of it in the US, by the way. I think in the US, there's actually a much more extraordinary thing to say, a much more reasoned discussion of this whole conflict than this has so far been in Europe. I mean, Britain is terrible. Germany, by the way, if anything, is worse. I mean, it's just awful to see what is floating around and circulating there. But I think even amongst people who are not, elite people, I think, you are starting to get people starting to come out. You're starting to see people on, comments threads, Twitter threads, starting to raise their concerns, their doubts, their skepticism. And of course, with when the situation in Ukraine takes the turn that we are all, I think we're not just expecting it. I mean, we are sure it will come. Then, of course, it will change completely. And I'm going to say something else. If we escalate, if we start going down the road of escalation, if we start sending, there's serious talk of sending fighter jets and troops to fight the Russians in Ukraine. Well, at that point,
from where?
I think that would be. Well, from
Poland.
where? Very good question. Poland, presumably. I mean, but I mean, if it's a question of British troops or German troops or French troops or American troops, well, then I think things will change completely. I think at that point, nothing could be done which would be more certain to electrify a large section of of British society, certainly. And to start questioning the whole narrative than doing something like that. There is no mood in Britain for war with Russia. Whatever, I mean, people may be furious about it. They may be putting up Ukrainian flags in their windows. I've seen one or two, by the way, but not that many. And I saw one, very interestingly, where the person put up a Ukrainian flag and a Russian flag. He put up both on his window, which is quite interesting. So, but anyway, I've seen a few like this, but not huge numbers. But if it's a question of Britain being dragged into a war over Ukraine, well, the British won't be pleased. I mean, at that point, the mood in Britain will change radically, and with it, all the doubts that we've been talking about, they'll bubble up to the surface. People certainly are not going to risk World War III over Ukraine.
Yeah, to speak seriously, before I was being, of course, jocular, but to speak seriously about the situation, I would agree, and I would argue that you gentlemen and myself and other people that we could call on the bleeding edge of media, of alt media. I don't want to, but people are listening to us to the degree that we're saying things that are true and pointing out things that are true. For instance, the fact that he's an actor, the fact that he was positioned by Ukrainian, Israeli, Cypriot oligarch, the fact that it's all kinds of corruption in Ukraine, the fact of the biolabs, for instance. Victoria Nuland herself said it. It was a conspiracy theory, and then all of a sudden, poof, it's reality. And all of a sudden, people are saying, whoa, this looked good from far away, but the closer I get, the uglier it is, the more it smells. And I think that that's the issue. I think that that's what we should be focused on, is trying to bring the truth about the situation and the basic corruption of this whole situation, and make it as clear as possible, and continue with our efforts. Because I think, I don't want to sound whatever, but I think that it is having an impact in the sense that people are realizing that this guy is not some hero. He's manufactured. It's a PR move. I think he's made some disastrous mistakes. For instance, the video that came out yesterday, I believe, that was green screened. It was ridiculous. It was absurd.
That was a big mistake.
And I think that it actually hurt him.
Sorry,
badly.
that was a big mistake. You're right.
Yeah. Absolutely, it was a big mistake. And so I think that people are starting to add up, because here's the thing: there's that old saying that you can fool, all the people some of the time, but you can't fool all the people all of the time. And that's very true. And I think that people are starting to realize, this guy doesn't smell right, and this whole thing doesn't smell right. And the other thing, this constant messaging that a lot of people are saying that the Zelensky regime, they're bad apples. They've got a lot of really nasty people, and video is coming out, and some of it is really grotesque. And those people seeing it are, of course, interested, but they are telling other people. And so that message is seeping through the zeitgeist, if you will. And so I do not think that there will ever be any kind of real popular support for an invasion of Ukraine. The only reason there could be, from my point of view, is to prevent political embarrassment. I think that, and that is the thing that troubles me the most, that certain actors, especially in Washington, will think to themselves that they want to avoid the political embarrassment, and so they will push for war, whatever it takes, so as to maintain their position and avoid the embarrassment. Because I personally think that in Ukraine, it is it's a box of corruption, and there are a lot of ugly stories. Because think of it: Pelosi's son, Biden's son, Mitt Romney's son, and John Kerry's son were all in the gas business, and they know nothing about it. The corruption, it's all over the place. And I think that is the fear that I have. Out of fear of embarrassment, they'll jump into this disaster.
Okay, let me throw. Yeah, go ahead, Alexander. No, I think because I think you have to run soon, Alexander, for another interview. But my final question to everybody, and to all the questions that have been sent, we'll do a dedicated video with regards to answering all the questions. But going off of what you just said, Gonzalo, I wonder in every crisis which is connected to corruption at such a high level, you always have to have a fall guy.
Yes.
Whether it's Harvey Weinstein, who we know was not the only one in Hollywood, or not even the only one in Hollywood at a high level doing the things that were taking place, but he definitely was the person that they picked to take the fall. Yeah, he was the patsy. In all of these situations, especially with Ukraine, where we know there was so much corruption on so many levels that go above and beyond Biden. I really believe that, above and beyond Biden. I wonder if the Hunter Biden laptop and everything that's going on maybe is setting up Biden to be the fall guy for all of this.
Oh, that's an interesting notion. Alexander, I have to chew on this. So Alexander, you answer first, because that's a good idea. That's a shrewd bet.
It is a shrewd idea. It is a shrewd idea. Well, I think we can't know. It's one of those difficult things to, but I think I'd have to chew on this. Do you want to?
He's got the connection with Burisma. He's got that video out there, which is if I don't fire him, well, you're not going to get the $6 billion. So the ground has been set, and they want him out anyway. I'm sure they're sitting in a room saying, he has to go sooner or later anyway, and he's destroyed the dollar as reserve currency. He's made a mess of things. Kamala, as bad as
Oh.
she is, at least, you know, we can fully control her to a certain extent. I mean, at least, you know, they can exert a lot of control over her. Definitely the Obama wing can definitely control
Yeah.
Kamala to a certain extent. And I'm sure that's appealing to Obama as well.
Oh yeah.
You know, I think to myself, there was a situation in Greece which was similar with PASOK. I don't know if you remember, Alexander, with PASOK, when the party PASOK collapsed, and they sent Tsochatzopoulos to be.
That's right.
A lot of people may not know what I'm talking about. The Greeks know what I'm talking about. All this corruption around this political party. They took one of the higher level guys, and they just threw him out to the wolves, and he was the person that was sacrificed. And you said it best, Gonzalo. You need that person, that patsy, that individual to take the fall for the whole structure of corruption, because what we're seeing in Ukraine is systemic. We're seeing systemic elitist corruption, systemic, both in the US and in the EU and in NATO. They're going to need someone to take the fall for this.
And I would be very go on. I just wanted to say I'd love. Can I just quickly say I'd love to hear Robert Barnes's take on this, because I think this is exactly the sort of thing that plays up to him. And just to let everybody know, we're preparing another program with him soon. We haven't yet finalized.
Would you like to jump in on that, Gonzalo?
Robert, if possible, sure.
Okay, let's set it up. Yeah, we'll set it up. Okay, go ahead, Alexander, Gonzalo, and we'll wrap it up.
I leave it to Gonzalo, because I think this is very interesting, actually.
Yeah, I think it's an incredibly shrewd supposition. This is highly speculative, but it would solve a lot of problems very neatly. You blame it all on Joe Biden. You say that the escalation over Ukraine was because the Biden administration, Hunter Biden, wanted to, cover up the whole improprieties, and you basically say, okay, Russia, have Ukraine, and you can walk away from the whole problem and turn the Ukraine albatross and just hang it on Joe Biden's neck and let him drown, and that's that. Since he's an old man, I don't mean to be crude or I don't want to, but he's clearly on his last legs, and so this might be just it's sort of like he will likely not live very long, and therefore once he is no longer with us, the problem just it just went up into the air. It's gone, and Hunter Biden serves 10 years and that's that. I think it would be a very neat solution, and a lot of people might really, really want that solution to happen. I mean, considering these politicians I mentioned, John Kerry and Nancy Pelosi and Mitt Romney, they might all basically come together in some room there with potpourri. I was going to say smoke filled, but they don't smoke, so it would be with potpourri, and they all decide, well, let's blame it all on Joe. Let Joe take the fall. Joe and Hunter, and our kids and our own careers and our own scams and whatnot, and greedy little schemes, we skate away. I mean, Alex, I have to hand it to you. This is a very, very shrewd guess.
To you, Gonzalo, I was listening to you and I said, that's makes sense. What you're saying.
That's the solution. That's you came up. That's the solution. You hit it right on the nail. Yeah. I mean, well, we'll see how things play out. God knows how things will play out. And this is just this is an idle parlor game. Chat. I just have to warn you. This is an idle parlor game, but it's fun.
And the Russians could be on board for this too, because we know they're communicating, and the Russians could be. Yeah, that's the off ramp. This is the off ramp.
Yeah.
Getting you president who brings us back to a more stable situation going forward. Blame it all on the corrupt old man and his awful son, and say, this is all a terrible mistake, and let's move on. Of course, lots of things that have been done are not going to be undone. They can't be, and probably the Russians wouldn't be entirely sorry about that either. So yes, I can certainly see how this might be true. Of course, again,
Alex,
we don't know it is, but it makes a lot of sense. Yeah.
Alex, you did
We're
a
just
video,
spitballing.
and
We're just
Yeah.
we're just spitballing. But Alex, you did a video about the Bulgarians saying that they're not going to re-sign with Gazprom, and basically, they're just pretending that they had a choice in the matter because Gazprom is not going to sign.
Exactly.
Very accurate. And by the way, I'm really liking the new video format you have there. I think it's really good, and it's really very entertaining. But the thing about the Gazprom situation, I think that the number one priority at this point is for Europe to get it to act together insofar as Russia is concerned, because I think that I hope that they're realizing that they can't survive without Russia, and their whole project is going to crater unless they make amends. So it could be that a lot of different forces come into play to pin the tail on this particular donkey and be done with the problem. But to your point, Alexander, the Russians are never going to forgive this, and they will never pay attention to the West again. The Russians have definitively turned away. And you know how I see it? It's really interesting. There are a lot of YouTubers that I follow, several of them, that they are young people in Russia. And I'm interested in it because I want to see what life in Russia is. And a couple of them, there's one called Ellie in Russia that went to a supermarket in Russia just a couple of days ago. And she filmed it and all the rest of it. And the key issue is that people are making do, but they're all aware of what's happening because there are goods and services that are no longer available to them. The Starbucks and the McDonald's. Well, now they're calling it Uncle Vanya, but they're realizing that a lot of things are unavailable to them. And I think this is a very highly subjective opinion, of course, but I think that the Russian people, because of the support they're showing to Putin, I think that I can safely say that the Russian people will never look at the West the same way again. And I think that their disinterest in the West, just basically a disengagement. And I think that long term, this might prove to be very healthy for Russian society. Because Russian society has always had a chip on its shoulder that it's European, but Russia. It's not quite European. But the way that the Europeans and the Americans, but the Europeans especially, turned on them so brutally and so in such an ugly way, I think that it sort of like woke up the Russians as a people and made them think, forget about them. Let's turn away. And I think it will have a long-term beneficial effect to Russia and a detrimental effect long-term to Europe, because it's going to be Europe that is going to be begging Russia. I mean, really, how are they going to get the gas that they need, the food that they need? You know what I'm saying?
Gonzalo, I am entirely with agreement with you on all of those points. I think that they could have imposed sanctions on Russia of the kind that they'd initially said and then stopped. And that would have caused problems. And they could have then said, it's all Putin's fault. He went as far as he did. He disregarded our warnings. We told him we were going to do these things. But they went far too far. They had this this vicarious, this visceral loathing and emotion, and it swept them away. And of course, as a result, the Russian people saw them for what they really were. And I think there were two things, by the way, to my mind, which really, really cut through. One was the flight ban. I mean, people don't understand that, but I mean, it means that Russians are basically unable now to travel to Europe in ways that brought home to them the fact that they're not wanted there. And the second, I think, was the IOC telling every sports federation across the world to ban Russian athletes. I mean, the fact that Russian athletes have been persecuted in all kinds of ways over the last 5 years, and this is a never-ending story. Well, now it culminated to an outright, utterly discriminatory ban, and I think that cut through. The fact that rich businessmen having their yachts stolen, outrageous though that is. I don't like these businessmen. I don't like those yachts. But you shouldn't just go around seizing people's property. That's outrageous. I don't think people in Russia particularly care about that. But these other things, they really did strike home. And it made Russians realize once and for all, these people just don't like us. So why are we wasting time with them?
Yeah. It's I've said this before. The analogy is the guy who keeps chasing the pretty girl and finally realizes, why am I chasing her? She doesn't care about me. But this bookish girl over here from Asia, she seems to like me. And the other thing I wanted to ask you, gentlemen, is the China issue. How do you see China playing the situation? I mean, is it like 100% solid behind the Russians, or is there any daylight between the relationships? Because as far as I see, it seems to be solid. But I'm wondering if you guys have a different perspective.
I think it's completely solid. I don't think there's any daylight between them. I think the meeting between Xi Jinping and Biden went exactly as one might have expected, with the Chinese taking an extremely strong line. And there's been a whole series of articles now appearing in the Chinese media, which are actually becoming stronger, including one I saw in Global Times, which said that Chinese-Russian relations are a key strategic asset. So I don't think there's any daylight at all. I think that whole attempt to try to turn the Chinese against the Russians failed. And here perhaps, and it goes back to some of the other things we've been saying in this program, I read through the readouts of the Biden-Xi conversation, and I have to say, it filled me with foreboding, because once more, you got the comments from Biden, which, give the impression, well, we're prepared to talk, we're prepared to negotiate, we understand your concerns, we have to meet you halfway. And Xi, at one point in the discussion, said to Biden, "Look, I hear that. I take what you say very, very seriously, but you said all the same things to me at the last meeting. And in fact, all that's happened is that you just continued exactly as before, taking anti-Chinese positions on every conceivable issue." So what he was basically saying was, I don't trust you. And that reminded me very, very much of the negotiations in the run-up to this war between the Americans and the Russians, all those meetings between Putin and Biden, all those Russian officials going around and having discussions with American officials, all those exchanges of position. And ultimately, one got the sense that the Russians finally accepted the fact that they're being lied to and had enough. And at the same time, that the Americans were basically out to get them. And I got exactly the same feeling from these readouts over these conversations between the Chinese and the Americans. And I'm afraid, just as it happened in relations between US and Russia, I'm afraid that with US and China, we're going to see a major escalation over the course of this year, unless the presidency changes and someone more grounded takes over. Because Alex knows that's how I feel about this. I was really, really very depressed after reading the readouts of that call.
That bad?
It was that bad. It was that bad.
Was it something beyond the tone? I mean, beyond the words? Was it a tonal thing? What was it that brought you down?
It was not a tonal thing. I mean, first of all, Biden threatened the Chinese, which is a crazy thing to do. You do not threaten the Chinese. I mean, the Chinese will always respond strongly to that. So he both threatened them, he tried at the same time to sweet talk them, and he was lying to them. Now, when you put all those three things together, especially when the Chinese know you're lying, as I said, Xi Jinping essentially told him, well, that suggests a diplomatic relationship that's close to breakdown, exactly as has happened between the US and Russia. And the similarities are so striking that, as I said, they fill me with concern. And we had all that talk over the last 2 weeks about the US wanting China to change its position, to clarify its stand towards Russia, things which the Chinese are never going to do. We've had more of that from Boris Johnson, by the way. He says that China must make a choice whether or not it wants to support evil. I mean,
that was laughable.
It's juvenile, but I mean, to the Chinese, remember, Britain is the former imperialist tormentor. So I mean, this isn't going to go down well in China at all. But when you see all of that, all of this coming from the West, and you see how the Chinese are responding, I'm going to say it straightforwardly. I think we are going to see a crisis in US-China relations probably within this year, perhaps
Really?
a little later.
Do you think
Yes,
that they're going to do
absolutely.
something that, as stupid as recognize Taiwan's independence?
Something of that kind is coming. I don't think that they'll go straight out of that way, but I think they'll do something with Taiwan, which is going to be, which the Chinese are going to see as crossing their red lines. And already, I mean, earlier today, I was seeing somewhere that a US official has been talking about the US protecting Taiwan, which from the Chinese point of view, I mean, that is a complete red line. So unless something in Washington happens to change this, well, who knows? Maybe that's also partly why we're getting all these Hunter Biden laptop things coming out. But unless something happens there, we're heading for a smash. And I've never felt quite as bad about the Chinese-US relationship as I have over the last few days. I would add, I never felt bad about the Chinese-US relationship when Trump was around, because for all his dramas, his bizarre tweets, his big words and all of that, I always felt that Trump knew when to stop.
Yeah.
Well, this administration doesn't know when to stop.
Well, it seems very clear that people like Jake Sullivan, people like the whole crowd, they are inexperienced people, and they manage the foreign policy recklessly. That's the thing that strikes me, and willing to take enormous gambles for little or no payoff.
Yes.
And so you because it's I don't know if it's ego that's making them or what's going on, but
it's because Jake Sullivan, Gonzalo, he's part of the Hillary Clinton wing. I mean, we know that now as a fact. And Hillary Clinton, the Clinton machine's money is not so much tied into China, from what I understand. It is more tied into Ukraine. I mean, a lot of her foundation funds were coming from the Ukraine side of things. And so, you know, I think for them, it's much better for them to escalate China. And for other Democrats who are very tied into China, and for a lot of the business community and Wall Street, which is very tied into China, they're going to be like, no chance. Don't go after China. I mean, I think here you're going to start to see some actual civil war within the DNC, within the power structure of the Democrats as well. Specifically the Hillary Clinton wing and say the other people in the Democrat Party who are very tied into China, like very tied into China.
But can you imagine having this conversation of like, oh, Hillary, Richard Nixon has interests in China, and so therefore, I mean, 40 years ago, the corruption, the sheer blatant hypocritical corruption in the West, it's just shocking to me. I mean, I guess I'm just way behind the times.
Well, the trouble with corruption is if it gets out of control, it affects everything. I mean,
no, it's
we're Greeks. We know what Greece is like and what it's been like, and we know what we're talking about when it comes to corruption. But can I just quickly add, and I've said this before about Jake Sullivan. Jake Sullivan really frightens me because he's a mediocrity who believes he's a genius, and that's the most dangerous combination you can find.
Oh man, and he cannot. It's not that he can't take a step back and hit reverse. He doesn't even have the conception that he's wrong.
No.
And when things go in ways that were obvious to any observer that they were going to go south badly because of his decisions, he simply doesn't see them as mistakes he's made. No. It must be so bizarre to live in a headspace where the negative things that happen to you happen arbitrarily for no reason, like the gods decided that it was going to be this way, and not a result of your incompetent actions. Bizarre. Gentlemen, I hate to do this.
Let's wrap it up.
Yes, I think so.
But real quick, Gonzalo, let's wrap it up. Alexander, you have another interview. Gonzalo, where can people find you? Because I know you're going to be doing a video or stream right after this one. Where can people find you real quick?
I'm going to be in my Gonzalo Lira channel. And that's the easy way to find me is just on YouTube, look up Gonzalo Lira, and there I am. And I'm going to be doing a live stream in About an hour or so, I think, from now. I have to do some things here, and yeah, I'm really looking forward to it. Well, not so much. I'm going to be discussing the situation in Mariupol and how a lot of the propaganda that the West has been pushing is really projection and just disinformation of the West, of taking things that the Zelensky regime is doing and assigning blame to the Russians for what they themselves are doing. And I'm going to bring up the fact that I have testimonies of people whom I know that corroborate the fact that the Zelensky regime are just animals, and that they're just the wrong people to be supporting. Yeah. So
all right, so I put the link to your channel in all the chats. Thank you
so
to
much.
everyone.
Absolutely.
Thank you to everyone who is watching us on Odyssey, on Rumble, on YouTube, and on the Duran.locals.com. Thank you to our moderators. Thank you very, very much to our moderators. What a great service that our moderators are doing to keep the chat moving. And what else do I want to say? I think that is it. I think that's it. Oh, all the questions that were sent, whether on Locals, on Odyssey, on Rumble, and on YouTube, the super chats, all the questions that were sent, we're going to have a dedicated video for that up tomorrow. So keep posted for that. We're going to answer all the questions and take our time to really answer all your inquiries in depth. So thank you very much, and keep an eye out for that tomorrow. Gonzalo, any final words? Everyone is worried about you, and we've said it a lot throughout this stream. Any final words?
No, I'm perfectly fine, and I'm going to try to go to a different sector of the city tomorrow to see more stuff on the ground, see what's going on, because yesterday was a long day and a very frightening day, to tell you the truth. But it was worthwhile. It was worth the effort, and so going out to the city to see more is just. Because being cooped up and just waiting is just driving me up the wall. So so that's going to be it'll be like a cool adventure. So thank you so much,
Alexander.
And gentlemen, thank you so much for having me on.
Thank you, Gonzalo. Alexander, final words.
Just to add, I mean, Gonzalo, do stay safe. Keep careful.
Oh yeah,
don't take any unnecessary risks. I mean, we are. One is thinking about. We are thinking about
Chicken
you
is
all
my
the
middle
time.
name. Okay.
Well, you're not showing much sign. You're not showing much sign of it, but I mean, and you are a wonderful and invaluable resource, and one which we all value very, very highly, both for what you provide us in terms of an analysis, but also because we all care for you as a person. But anyway, another incredibly dramatic day, and as I said, it's very strange because we now have this strange situation of the Ukrainian crisis still rumbling on towards its inevitable conclusion, and at the same time we now have and surely it's not chance of this reopening of the political crisis in the US. So we'll see how the two play out.
On that note, we will leave it there. Take care, everybody.